Welcome to BioStream 360. I'm Owen Ambrose, and today I explore the ruined shoreline of Dead Horse Bay in Brooklyn, New York. Now, when you join me on these BioStreams, I'm typically looking for fossils and pieces of natural history, but Dead Horse Bay is a place of an entirely different nature. This is a place of vast history, and what I'm walking through right now is a bunch of very old, antique to vintage garbage. So let me give you a little bit of history that explains why it's here. The shoreline I'm walking on is commonly referred to as Glass Bottle Beach, and if you scan your view around using the 360 function of this video, you can see why. There's a shoreline of sand with the garbage piled up along it, and then to my right you see a greater rise of land. Now this area is a former landfill, and for a moment I'm going to talk about how that landfill ended up being there, why this place is called Dead Horse Bay, and why all of the stuff from that landfill is washing up along the shore. Back in the late 1800s up until around 1950, this was an active landfill, and around 1950 there was a decision to develop the area into the Floyd Bennett airfield and cap the landfill. The thing is this, when it was capped, the landfill was closed improperly. So fast forward to about 1980, 1990, there were some changes made to this watery area, the bay itself, and when those changes took place, the water began to flow in through this area, and the improperly capped landfill began to erode away. And so all of that garbage that was put here and dumped from the late 1800s to the early 1900s has been washing down through erosion and landing on the shore. And that makes this a favorite place of mudlarkers, people who like to come to shorelines and look for ancient or antique or vintage garbage. Things that wash up along the shoreline, things that were discarded or lost long ago. So why is it called Dead Horse Bay? Well, that's another history lesson. Back when New York City was first developing, this part of Brooklyn was considered an impoverished area, kind of a no man's land, a place people didn't want to really live. But it was a cheap place to live, so people began to live around here. Now, part of the reason it was such a cheap place to live is that this is where the animal processing industry took place. Now, I'm not talking about butchering or the meat industry. I'm talking about taking the remains of those butchered animals or animals that just died in service, like horses that were used for transport and things like that. Those animals would be sent to this area, and throughout this area, there were processing facilities. Now, this was a nasty kind of work because when those dead animals were sent there, they were being sent in order to be turned into glue. So we would have gigantic vats of boiling stuff, and horse parts and other mammal parts were thrown into those vats and kind of boiled off. And what you can imagine is that as that was happening, the stench in this area was awful. Not only did the smell come from the boiling of the animals, it also came from the fact that the animals themselves, after being boiled or before, were simply rotting. And so what would happen is those animals, after being processed, would simply be tossed into the water, and then their remains would wash up along these shorelines. Now, amidst all the garbage that's here that is coming down from the eroded landfill, there are also many, many, many animal bones. They're partially mineralized. They're not fossilized, but they are quite old. Some of them over 100 years old. And actually, I see one right here. I see two right here. So these kinds of bone fragments can be found throughout all of the garbage here. Now, when I first started coming here, I would pick up pretty much any bone I saw because I thought they were just so cool, and, you know, I'm into bones and things like that. But at this point, I've realized that they're just so common, most of them can be just left alone. So, there was the animal processing industry, those animals would be rendered to glue, thrown into the bay. But again, people also lived here. If you go to Google Earth or any other satellite imaging program and look up Dead Horse Bay in Brooklyn, you'll actually see that along the shoreline of Dead Horse Bay, there is a forested kind of grassy area. And what you should imagine is that in that area and further inland towards where the airfield now is, there were actually really shoddy towns, like shacks and things like that people lived in. And what happened was, when they decided that this area was going to be turned into a landfill, they basically evicted everybody that lived there. So all of these houses that people had their entire lives built up in, even though the houses may not have had much in the way of material riches, people were just kicked out, kind of out of nowhere. And they came in, raised all the houses, put them to the ground, and incorporated them in the earliest parts of the landfill. So as I'm walking through garbage, I'm also walking through the ruins of people's livelihood. So I'm not going to say much for a moment. You could just take a moment to scan the camera around and really see the vastness of all the stuff here. I'm kind of going to walk around from the eroding landfill to the water and let you take that in for a moment as I search. One of my favorite things to find here are ornate pieces of metalwork. This is probably iron, and you may be able to see on camera, it's not just a piece of typical functioning metalware. When this was crafted, there was some ornate design crafted into it, and there are quite a few pieces like this here. I'm assuming most of them are Victorian in age. So, that would be the time where most of that really ornate metalwork was being done. Another favorite thing for me to find are old toys. Now, those toys range from the 1800s up until the 1950s. So some of them are kind of cool, retro-looking plastic pieces, while others are really neat, old, metal-crafted toys. Interestingly, coming here kind of shows me what was popular back in those times. Many of the metal pieces are soldiers, kind of army figures, things like that. And aside from that, we mostly have toy cars, trucks, and trains. And the third most popular thing would be toy guns. So, if you think about the time frame that I'm referring to, you can kind of see that those were really predominant parts of what kids would kind of engage in. They would engage in fantasies about being grown-ups and engaging on these kind of, I guess at the time they would think of it as masculine adventures. Another interesting thing is you don't really find many toys designed for girls here, and I'm saying they would have been designed for girls at that time. We may find some costume jewelry and things like that, but really no girl type figures, except for occasionally we find my favorite thing to locate here, which would be creepy doll heads. But those are at this point a rarity because I think people find them and kind of gobble them up. So I'm going to walk over to the shoreline now. You'll get a glimpse of the bottles washing up all over the place. And again, sorry I'm not looking at the camera much. It's just the draw to search as I'm walking is just too strong. So I pointed out that the landfill behind me is the eroding part. The secondary thing that happens is that over the years, as things have eroded out, they've kind of been swallowed by the bay. And at low tide, which I'm approaching now, I'm approaching the time of low tide, a lot of those things kind of resurface. So many of them get brought into the water, get washed off, and then kind of come back from their watery resting place. So we'll see if I can find anything cool in this area. This also happens to be the zone that people tend to search the most. So the likelihood of finding something amazing is not great right here. Just because when people walk here, this is the zone they walk in. Now, you could see that I am pretty much surrounded by marine birds. And if you can't see it, you certainly can hear it. And that gives me something to mention before I close here. Most of the time I come here, I will find that people are fishing off the shores. There have been many times that I've come and I've found like homeless squatter sections where people that don't have a place to live kind of set up a temporary residence, set up a fire, and pull fish from this water, cook it up and eat it. That is a very interesting and somewhat unsettling occasion. And the reason I say that is because not only is there the garbage, the remnants of this landfill washing up along the shoreline, but if you were to come here, you would notice there is a very, very strong chemical smell that really dominates the entire landscape. Now, you may be able to hear in the background the constant hum of traffic. There is a really heavily used bridge to that direction. That bridge is just, there's traffic going over it nonstop. And the fumes from that traffic just fill the air throughout this area. I would assume that if I were to bend down and smell the ground, which I won't, that same smell would be coming out of here. And as I walked the shoreline to get to this area, I counted at least 15 dead fish. Dead, not caught by people and butchered, but dead as in just died of natural causes. I don't really have the means to test it, but I would very surely assume that the water here is of a very poor quality and that there are toxic components to it. And in a future video, I'll be going over how those toxic components in ecosystems like this end up traveling up a food chain, and as they do, their essential deadliness becomes more and more magnified. But that's for a future video. I'm Owen Ambrose. This was BioStream 360. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait for you to see where we end up next time.